Welcome to Energy Law. Let's just say a little bit about what energy law is and why it's so important. And we'll start by talking about why energy is so important. So I'm going to start with this quote from Václav Smil, who's a very important public intellectual. And he says, the course of history can be seen as the quest for controlling greater stores and flows of more concentrated and more versatile forms of energy and converting them in more affordable ways at lower costs and with higher efficiency into heat, light, and motion. That's from a book you wrote just a few years ago, Energy and Civilization. I recommend it. But whether you take the perspective of an economic historian or if you take the perspective of a scientist, one thing we know is that whether you're talking about biology or physics, energy is crucial to the world. Biology is a search for that energy. Physics is about the use of that energy to create things. And if you look at human society as well, it is created by harnessing energy. And we can see that process of harnessing energy in the progress of civilization. So, if you look at history and you take any measure of human welfare, so here we're looking at life expectancy at birth. And what you can see is that basically there was zero progress on this for millennia and millennia, for most of human existence. But just with the Industrial Revolution after the year 1800, there is this incredible increase in life expectancy that happens. And that's also true if you look at any other measure of human welfare. This incredible increase in, if we look at GDP per capita, so how much resources are produced per person, we see the same thing with basically very, very little for all of human history until you get the Industrial Revolution and everything changes. And in fact, if you look at a broad array of these measures of human welfare, whether it's the percentage of people not living in extreme poverty, the percentage of people living in a democracy, they all have the same shape, which is that people effectively were always in that same existence that we have described by Hobbes in 1650, where life is nasty, brutish, and short. And that all changes with the Industrial Revolution. But why does that change? Well, it changes with the ability to harness energy that allows people to specialize, because not everybody's life has to be devoted to producing that energy anymore. People are able to work in specialized fields. Cities are able to grow larger, etc. And what you can see here is on this orange energy capture chart is that basically that energy capture, as that increases, sort of inaugurates the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And as we'll talk about, that mostly comes with the ability to harness the energy in coal. And so if you look at where cities were built in the 19th century, where a lot of the urban population in Europe and really across the world still lives, it's around those coal fields and that ability to harness that energy. And as we'll describe, that coal energy has lots of downsides. And in some ways, it's not necessarily even cheaper or anything better than the hydropower, wind power that existed before it. But it has a unique ability to be transported and brought to create conglomerations of people working together in factories, et cetera, like those that we have in our city. And we'll talk about that transport advantage enables modern civilization and enables people to rise out of poverty, enables people to live 60, 70, 80 years instead of 30 years. And so everything we know about the modern world was really driven by the increasing ability of humanity to harness that energy. So we know that if you look at our past, we are where we are today. We get to live more than 30 years because of those energy revolutions that allowed us to harness that energy. We also know that if we look in the future, we are just going to be using more and more energy to bring more people out of poverty, to continue to raise the standard of living for people across the world. And if you look at projections of how much energy we'll be using in the future, I think what's remarkable is that, we're using a lot of energy now, but people expect we'll be using a lot more in the future. In some ways, some of the most dramatic rise is going to come in, those renewables, which you see in this green chart here. One thing that I want you to do through charts throughout this is think about, when are we talking about history, and when are we talking that we've actually measured, and when are we talking about projections about the future? And you can see this chart breaks down in about 2017. So 2017, we see the history, it's nicely marked here to the left, and we see the projections to the right. And what you can see is different sources of fuel. So the biggest one in the world, and this is true in the United States as well, is petroleum or oil. Coal is the next biggest, then natural gas. So all those fossil fuels are by far our biggest, but we do have a lot of renewables, and we're getting more every year. And so if you look at what people project for the future, they project that at some point, those renewables may become our largest source of energy. But it's not, most projections are not for those other sources of energy to go away. If you look at coal, it's falling off a little bit, but basically stagnant. Who knows, maybe recovering in the future. Most people project that there'll be more natural gas and even more oil over time. So what we're seeing is a ramping up of all these kinds of energy as we try to increase the standard of living for people around the world. Now, as we'll discuss, these projections have all been challenged. There's lots of debates about what the future will be, and there's a lot of uncertainty, because when we look at past projections, often they can be wrong, and often it's unpredictable which direction they'll be wrong in. But what I want you to understand is, regardless of what energy source you think is going to be most dominant in the future, what we're looking at is humanity's increased use of energy to drive increasing prosperity in the coming decades and over the course of your career. So that's if you're interested about the future of humanity. If you're interested also about where investment is made, how the economy works, what drives the success of the economy in different areas of the world, you have to understand energy. If we look at how energy can be one of the biggest areas for world and United States investment, and sometimes drives a lot of the capital expenditures. So when you spend money on something that's going to provide services to you for decades to come or years to come, often that is done in the energy area. And you see that that plays an extremely important role in capital expenditures around the world. So when people are looking for things to invest in, often it's big energy projects. If you look at that global capital expenditures, again, we see that depending on how you measure it, energy can be the biggest source of those capital expenditures. And keep in mind, energy includes both those fuels, like gasoline that you put in your car, natural gas that you use to heat your house or to run your appliances, but also electricity. And we'll talk about both of these different kinds of electricity: fuels that you burn yourself, and then electricity that you can use for many purposes in this course, because they're both extremely important. And we see huge capital expenditures in both sectors: in fuels for new oil and gas development projects, for new pipelines to get that to market, for new liquefied natural gas facilities here in the United States to take that natural gas and ship it overseas, in electricity for new power plants, for new power lines to get that to market, new distribution. This is one of the main focuses of world economic activity. All right. So when we talk about energy law, we're really talking about several areas. And I'll start on the right side here with oil and gas. Now, some of you have taken my oil and gas course. You know I have a whole oil and gas course, and we won't be able to cover it that much depth in this energy law course, which is more of a survey and also covers natural resources, which is wider than just oil and gas. You know, it can include, of course, includes coal, but it also includes other natural resources like water, uranium, etc. Hey, we'll also talk about public utilities regulation. So, in much of the country, people get their electricity from a utility, and we still get, even here in Dallas, although we have a deregulated market that allows you to choose your electricity provider, you're going to get water, trash services, et cetera, from public utilities. And we'll talk about how that utility regulation works, because in most of the world, that's how people get their electricity as well, and still in important ways here in Texas, even though we've introduced competition to some of those markets. And of course, we're going to also need to talk about environmental law, because as we'll discuss, all of these energy sources have different environmental downsides that make them, present challenges that have to be minimized if we want to maximize the benefit of our energy system, because that includes both the services it provides us, but if you're looking at the net benefit, we also have to think about the costs that it causes to us in terms of dirty air, in terms of climate change, in terms of dirty water, et cetera. So how do we control those? And so if you want to think about energy law overall, these are the laws that help us maximize the net benefits from energy, and also to limit the cost of providing that resource to consumers, while also limiting the environmental harms that can be caused by producing and distributing energy.